The velvet curtains of the penthouse office tore open with such violence that Vivian Brooks thought someone had died, and judging by the whispers echoing through the marble corridors of Zarkova Enterprises, someone always did. She clutched her leather portfolio against her chest, trying to make herself invisible among the sleek glass and obsidian decor of the reception area. This was her 19th job interview in 3 months, and desperation had finally driven her to apply for a position everyone in the city knew was cursed. Assistant to Theron Zarkova, CEO of the largest private equity firm in North America, a man so cold that 5 assistants had quit in the past month alone. The rumor mill churned constantly with stories about his impossible standards, his glacial demeanor, his eyes that seemed to look straight through you and find you wanting. What the rumor mill didn't know was what Vivian had discovered during her obsessive research the night before, hunched over her laptop in her cramped studio apartment while the electricity threatened to cut out again. Theron Zarkova wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was a vampire. An actual, honest-to-God vampire who had somehow managed to hide his true nature behind shell companies, tinted windows, and a schedule that never saw daylight. The evidence had been scattered across obscure forums and digitized historical documents. A man matching his exact description appearing in photographs spanning back to 1823. Business empires rising and falling under different names, but always the same pale face, the same sharp cheekbones, the same penetrating stare. Property records showing purchases of buildings with reinforced basement levels and no windows. And most damningly, a pattern of assistants who left his employ with generous severance packages and an uncanny reluctance to ever discuss what they'd witnessed. Vivian should have run. Should have deleted her application and found some nice, normal job serving coffee or filing insurance claims. But her bank account had other ideas, and so did the eviction notice taped to her door. Besides, she'd always been too curious for her own good, a trait that had gotten her fired from her last 3 positions for asking inconvenient questions about accounting irregularities and labor violations. Ms. Brooks? The receptionist's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The woman was stunning in that uncanny way that made Vivian's instincts scream. All porcelain skin and knowing eyes. Another vampire, probably. Mr. Zarkova will see you now. Vivian stood, smoothing down her pencil skirt with trembling hands. She'd worn her best interview outfit, a navy suit that was only slightly worn at the elbows, and had managed to wrangle her mass of dark curls into something approximating professionalism. The receptionist led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Vivian would earn in a lifetime, toward a set of towering double doors made of black wood inlaid with silver. The doors opened silently, revealing an office that looked like it had been carved from midnight itself. Everything was dark wood, brushed metal, and deep burgundy accents. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, but they were tinted so heavily that the afternoon sun barely penetrated, casting the room in permanent twilight. And there, behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table, sat the Vampire King himself. Theron Zarkova was beautiful in the way that winter was beautiful, remote, crystalline, and absolutely lethal. His hair was so pale it appeared almost silver in the dim light, swept back from a face that could have been sculpted from marble. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime in the last century. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray with a precision that suggested custom tailoring and old money. But it was his eyes that made Vivian's breath catch a shade of blue, so pale they were almost colorless, like ice on the verge of cracking. Those eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. "Sit," he said, his voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe. Old enough that the modern world had smoothed most of it away. Vivian sat, trying not to think about the fact that she was alone in a room with a predator who could probably kill her before she even screamed. Her portfolio slipped from her grip, papers scattering across the pristine floor. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, dropping to her knees to gather them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scrambled to collect her resume, her reference letters, the writing samples she'd carefully prepared. When she finally looked up, Theron hadn't moved, but something in his expression had shifted. Was that amusement? No, that couldn't be right. "Clumsiness is not generally considered an asset in this position," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "No, sir. Mr. Zarkova, Vivian took a breath, forcing herself to meet those unsettling eyes. I'm nervous. This is an important opportunity, and I really need this job. Honesty, he said, leaning back in his chair. How refreshing. Tell me, Miss Brooks, why do you think you're qualified to work for me when 5 assistants before you have failed? Because I know what you are, and I'm not running. The words almost escaped her lips, but she caught them at the last second. Instead, she said, because I'm not afraid of difficult employers. My last boss was embezzling from his own company, and I reported him. The one before that was sexually harassing the junior staff, and I documented everything for the lawsuit. I've been fired for being inconvenient, for asking too many questions, for not playing along with corruption. So a demanding boss with high standards? That actually sounds like a relief. Theron studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You realize this position requires absolute discretion. You would be privy to information that could destroy empires if it fell into the wrong hands. I understand confidentiality agreements, Mr. Zarkova. Do you? He stood, moving with a fluid grace that was definitely not human, and circled around the desk. Vivian forced herself to remain still as he approached, every instinct screaming at her to flee. He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his skin, the way no pulse beat at his throat. Do you understand what it means to keep secrets that could get you killed? I've been poor my entire life, Vivian said quietly. I've understood that kind of danger since I was old enough to walk home alone after dark. Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite respect, but perhaps recognition. He returned to his desk, picking up her resume with those long, elegant fingers. Your employment history is erratic. My employment history reflects a series of principles that kept getting in the way of keeping my mouth shut. And yet you claim you can be discreet. There's a difference between discretion and complicity, Mr. Zarkova. I can keep your secrets as long as they don't involve hurting people who don't deserve it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're in no position to make demands or moral judgments, Ms. Brooks. No, she agreed, but you're conducting interviews at sunset on a Friday, which suggests you're as desperate as I am, so maybe we can help each other. For the first time, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth whatsoever. The position requires availability at all hours. My schedule is unconventional, and I expect my assistant to adapt accordingly. The pay is substantial, but the work is demanding. You would essentially have no personal life. I currently have no personal life and no money, so that's actually an improvement. You would begin Monday, 6 p.m. sharp. Do not be late. Vivian blinked. I got the job? Unless you've changed your mind. Those pale eyes bored into hers. This is your last chance to walk away, Miss Brooks. After this, there's no quitting without consequences. Every rational part of her brain was screaming warnings, but her bank account and her curiosity were louder. I'll be here Monday at 6. Then we're done. My secretary will provide you with the necessary paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. Read them carefully, break them, and you'll discover I can be far more unpleasant than merely demanding. Vivian gathered her scattered papers and stood on shaking legs. She made it to the door before his voice stopped her. Ms. Brooks, the next assistant who spills something in my presence would be well advised to ensure it's not blood. She fled, his cold laughter following her down the hallway. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Vivian studied everything she could find about Zarkova Enterprises, memorizing names and subsidiaries, learning the corporate structure and business portfolio. The company had fingers in everything from real estate to technology to rare antiquities, legitimate on the surface, but with enough gray areas to hide an ocean of secrets. She also researched vampire lore, trying to separate folklore from fact. Sunlight was clearly an issue, given Theron's nocturnal schedule. Crosses and garlic seemed like Hollywood nonsense, but silver appeared frequently enough in historical accounts to be worth noting. Blood, obviously. The question was whether he sustained himself on willing donors, or if those generous severance packages came with a more sinister price. Monday evening arrived too quickly. Vivian dressed in her second-best suit and comfortable flats, remembering her earlier disaster with scattered papers. She arrived at Zarkova Enterprises at 5:45, giving herself time to sign in with security and navigate the labyrinthine building. The receptionist from Friday, whose nameplate read Celine, greeted her with a knowing smile. Your desk is just outside Mr. Zarkova's office. I'll show you the basics, but you'll learn quickly or you won't last. No judgment either way. Most don't." "Encouraging," Vivian muttered. Her workspace was elegant and efficient, a curved desk with multiple monitors and a phone system that looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. Selena walked her through the basics: scheduling software, filing systems, security protocols. Everything was encrypted, password protected, and monitored. "He takes his privacy seriously," Selena explained. "No phones inside the executive suite, no recordings of any kind, no discussing his business with anyone, including other employees. You'll be required to undergo weekly security checks." "Weekly?" "He has enemies, and they would pay dearly for information about his vulnerabilities." Celine's smile showed too many teeth. "Don't be one of those people, Vivian. The money isn't worth it." Before Vivian could respond, the office doors opened and Theron emerged. He'd exchanged his suit jacket for just the vest and shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were all lean muscle and pale skin. He looked like he'd stepped out of a gothic romance novel, if the romance novel involved hostile takeovers and blood drinking. "Miss Brooks, you're early. Good." He handed her a leather-bound folder. "These are the files for tonight's meeting. Familiarize yourself with them. You'll be taking notes." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in corporate warfare. Vivian sat in a conference room lined with original oil paintings, watching Theron systematically dismantle the arguments of 3 separate business rivals. His voice never rose. He never made threats. He simply presented facts with surgical precision until his opponents had no choice but to capitulate. She took notes furiously, trying to keep up with the rapid-fire negotiations. Twice, Theron glanced at her, those unsettling eyes checking her progress. Once, when one of the businessmen tried to intimidate her with a leer and a crude comment, Theron's response was immediate and devastating. "Mr. Chen, if you ever look at my assistant that way again, I will ensure your company's stock is worthless by morning. Are we clear?" The man paled and mumbled an apology. Vivian felt a confusing mix of gratitude and fear. Theron's protection was absolute, but it also marked her as his in a way that made her skin prickle. The meetings finally ended at midnight. Vivian's hand was cramped from writing, and her brain felt like it had been put through a blender. Theron dismissed the others and turned to her. "Coffee? Black? My office?" She nodded and headed for the break room, grateful for a task that didn't require complex thinking. The coffee machine was state-of-the-art, all chrome and buttons that probably did things beyond her comprehension. She managed to brew a cup without incident and carried it carefully back toward his office. That was when her heel caught on the corner of an expensive rug. Time seemed to slow as she stumbled forward, the cup flying from her hands. She had a moment to think, "This is it, I'm fired," before she crashed into something solid and cold. Theron had moved faster than her eyes could track, catching her before she hit the ground. But the coffee wasn't so lucky. It splashed across his pristine white shirt, staining the fabric dark. "Oh, God," Vivian whispered, frozen in his arms. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the shirt. She looked up and found his face inches from hers. This close, she could see that his eyes weren't just pale blue but contained flecks of silver, like ice crystals. She could smell him, something cold and clean like winter air and old libraries. And she could feel the absolute stillness of his body, the way he didn't breathe, didn't move, except with deliberate intention. "You spilled coffee on me," he said, his voice strange. Not angry, precisely, but something else. Something almost like wonder. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy. I'll resign if you want. No one has ever spilled anything on me before." He was staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "In 237 years, not a single person has been careless enough or brave enough to—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he was still holding her. He set her on her feet with exaggerated care and stepped back, his expression closing off. "Clean this up, then go home. We'll discuss your employment in the morning." Vivian spent the rest of the night convinced she'd be jobless by dawn. But when she arrived Tuesday evening, Celine greeted her with an enigmatic smile and told her to report directly to Theron's office. He was standing by the windows, looking out over the city. He'd changed shirts, this one a deep blue that somehow made his pale coloring even more striking. "Ms. Brooks, sit." She sat, hands clenched in her lap, waiting for the axe to fall. "You're still employed," he said without preamble. "Against my better judgment, I find your chaos oddly refreshing." "My chaos?" Every assistant I've employed has been terrified of making mistakes. They move through my space like they're walking on glass, anticipating my needs, never putting a foot wrong. It's tedious. He turned to face her, and there was something almost alive in his expression. You trip over rugs, you scatter papers, you spill coffee, and yet you show no fear of me personally, only of losing your income. Why? Vivian debated lying, but something told her he'd see right through it. Because you're not the scariest thing I've dealt with. Poverty is scarier. Homelessness is scarier. My father's fists were scarier before he finally drank himself to death. His expression hardened. He hurt you. He hurt everyone, but he's dead now, and I survived, and I'm not afraid of men who think intimidation is the same as power. She met his eyes. Even if those men aren't technically men anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Theron crossed the room with that inhuman speed, and suddenly he was right there, looming over her desk. Vivian's heart hammered, but she held her ground. You know what I am. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. And yet you applied for this position. I needed the job, and I thought maybe someone who's lived as long as you have might be less awful than the regular humans I've worked for. At least you have an excuse for being cold. He stared at her for a long moment, then did something she'd never expected. He laughed. It was a rusty sound, like he was out of practice, but it was genuine. An excuse for being cold, he repeated. That's one way of putting it. He returned to his desk, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Very well, Miss Brooks. Since we're apparently being honest, let me be clear. I am a vampire. I am several centuries old. I have killed more people than you've met in your lifetime. I am not safe. I am not kind, and I am certainly not human, but I am honorable within my own code, and I protect what's mine. As my assistant, you fall under my protection. That means no one touches you, no one threatens you, and no one harms you without answering to me. In return, you keep my secrets and do your job. Agreed? Agreed, Vivian said, though her voice shook slightly. Can I ask questions about what you are? You may ask, I may not answer. Do you kill people? I do on occasion, when they threaten my interests or break our laws. I do not kill indiscriminately, and I have not killed anyone in this city in over a decade. Do you drink blood? What do you think? He tilted his head, and for the first time, she saw the predator beneath the businessman. I have arrangements with several willing donors, humans who are well compensated for their contribution. I am not a monster, Ms. Brooks, though I am certainly not a man. Okay, Vivian said, processing this. Okay, that's less awful than I feared. Your standards are remarkably low. You'd be amazed what poverty does to your standards. Something shifted in his expression, a slight softening around his eyes. You'll be paid bi-weekly, double the salary we discussed. And there's an apartment in the building reserved for essential personnel. You may use it if you wish. The commute would be easier. Vivian blinked. Thank you, but why? Because you're the first assistant who hasn't quit after learning the truth, and I find I don't want to conduct more interviews. He picked up a file. Now, we have work to do. There's a hostile takeover to plan, and I need someone to organize my research. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Vivian arrived each evening at 6, stayed until Theron dismissed her sometime between midnight and dawn, and gradually learned the rhythms of working for an immortal businessman. She discovered that he was demanding but never cruel, that his standards were impossibly high but applied equally to himself, and that he had a bone-dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments. She also learned that the vampire world was far more complex than she'd imagined. Theron wasn't just a CEO, he was royalty among his kind. The Vampire King, one of the oldest and most powerful of their species, respected and feared in equal measure. His business empire was just the visible portion of a vast network of influence that stretched across continents and centuries. There are rules, he explained one night when she'd asked about vampire politics. They were alone in his office, the city glittering beyond the windows. Laws that govern our kind. We do not expose ourselves to humans. We do not create new vampires without permission from the council. We do not hunt indiscriminately. Break these laws and the consequences are severe. What kind of consequences? Death. Always death. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing a business merger. We are immortal, Miss Brooks, but we are not indestructible. Silver through the heart, decapitation, fire, sunlight. There are ways to kill us, and the council employs executioners who are very, very good at their work. Vivian shivered. Have you ever had to do that? Execute someone? Yes. His eyes grew distant. It's not pleasant, but it's necessary. Our survival depends on remaining hidden, on maintaining order. One rogue vampire can undo centuries of careful work. She wanted to ask more, but his phone buzzed with an alert. His expression darkened as he read the message. It seems we have a problem. One of my business rivals has hired a vampire hunter. A what? Exactly what it sounds like. Humans who know about us and make it their business to kill us. Most are charlatans, but some are genuinely dangerous. He stood, moving to a concealed panel in the wall that opened to reveal an arsenal of weapons. This one is legitimate. Marcus Hunt. He's killed 3 vampires in the last year. Vivian's blood ran cold. What are you going to do? Handle it. You should go home. But Vivian. The use of her first name stopped her cold. He'd never used it before, always maintaining professional distance. This is not your fight. Go home. Lock your doors. If anything happens to me, Celine will ensure you're taken care of. I'm not leaving you to face a hunter alone. I've survived 2 centuries. I think I can manage one human with a grudge. But Vivian saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly. He was worried, which meant she should be terrified. Let me help, she said. I'm human. Maybe I can— No. The word cracked like a whip. You will not put yourself in danger for me. That is an order, Miss Brooks. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Vivian nodded, though she had no intention of actually obeying. She gathered her things and left the office, but instead of going to her new apartment, she doubled back and hid in the break room, watching through the frosted glass. An hour later, the elevator doors opened, and a man emerged. He was unremarkable in every way, medium height, brown hair, ordinary features. But he moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was, and Vivian saw the wooden stakes strapped to his thighs, the silver knife at his belt. Marcus Hunt had arrived. Theron met him in the reception area, and Vivian's heart clenched at the sight of him. He looked every inch the vampire king, tall and regal and coldly beautiful. But there was something in his posture that suggested this was costing him more than he wanted to admit. Mr. Hunt, I was wondering when you'd show yourself. The hunter's smile was unpleasant. Sarkova, your kind has gotten too comfortable, too visible. You've forgotten that humans fight back. Some humans. The foolish ones who don't understand the order that keeps this world running. Order? Hunt laughed. You mean the lies, the cover-ups, the innocent people who disappear because they saw something they shouldn't. I have never harmed an innocent. You're a vampire. Your existence harms humanity. Theron sighed, the sound weary. I was human once, Mr. Hunt. I remember what it was like. And I have spent centuries trying to build bridges between our worlds, trying to ensure that vampires and humans can coexist. But there are those on both sides who prefer war. Pretty speech. Doesn't change what you are. The hunter moved faster than Vivian expected, the silver knife flashing in the low light. Theron dodged, but not quickly enough. The blade scored across his arm, and he hissed in pain. Silver, Vivian remembered. It hurts them. She couldn't watch anymore. Without thinking, she burst from the break room, grabbing the first thing she could find, a heavy crystal award from a side table. She threw it with all her strength, and by sheer dumb luck, it connected with Hunt's head. The hunter staggered, surprised, and Theron took advantage of the distraction. He moved with blinding speed, disarming Hunt and pinning him against the wall with one hand around his throat. You brought my assistant into this, Theron said, his voice dropping into a register that made Vivian's bones ache. That was a mistake. But he didn't kill the hunter. Instead, he simply applied pressure until Hunt passed out, then let him crumple to the floor. He turned to Vivian, his pale eyes blazing. What did I tell you? To go home. I didn't listen. Clearly, he looked at his bleeding arm, then at her, then back at the unconscious hunter. You could have been killed. So could you. I'm already dead, Miss Brooks. It would simply be a matter of becoming more so. That's not funny. It wasn't meant to be. He swayed slightly, and Vivian realized the silver poisoning was affecting him more than he wanted to admit. She rushed forward, catching his good arm. You need help. Blood or whatever. Tell me what to do. I need He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I need to feed, but I won't take from you. Why not? Because you're human. Because you work for me. Because I have never taken blood from someone who was under my protection, and I won't start now, no matter how much. He stopped himself. How much what? How much I want to. The words were barely a whisper. Vivian, I need you to call Celine. She'll know what to do. But Vivian found herself taking a step closer instead of backing away. She'd been working for Theron for 6 weeks now, and somewhere in those late nights and sharp conversations, something had shifted. She'd stopped seeing him as just her boss or even just a vampire. She'd started seeing him as Theron, lonely, ancient, carrying the weight of centuries with a grace that broke her heart. Take from me, she said. I trust you. His expression went through a series of rapid changes: shock, hunger, refusal, longing. You don't know what you're offering. Then explain it to me. When a vampire drinks from someone, there's a connection, a bond. It's intimate in ways that go beyond the physical. I would taste your emotions, your memories. You would feel what I am. And once that bond exists, it's nearly impossible to break. You would be bound to me, Vivian. Is that what you want? She should say no, should run away and never look back. But instead, she heard herself say, yes. Why? His hand came up to cup her face, cold fingers against her warm skin. Why would you want to be bound to a monster? Because you're not a monster. You're just someone who's been alone for too long. She placed her hand over his. And because I think I'm already bound to you anyway. So we might as well make it official. He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, he lowered his head to her throat. She felt the brush of his lips against her pulse, the scrape of fangs, and then a sharp pinch that blossomed into something altogether different. Heat flooded through her, along with images that weren't her own. She saw Theron as he'd been centuries ago, human and young and full of hopes that would never be realized. She saw the vampire who'd turned him, the decades of learning to control the hunger, the loneliness of watching everyone he loved grow old and die. She saw his business empire built over centuries, each success hollow because there was no one to share it with. And she felt his emotions now: hunger, yes, but also wonder and longing, and the terrifying realization that he'd started to care for his clumsy assistant who refused to be afraid of him. When he finally pulled back, his eyes had changed. The pale blue now held flecks of gold, and there was color in his cheeks that hadn't been there before. He licked a drop of blood from his lips, and Vivian shivered at the intimacy of the gesture. You taste like sunlight, he murmured, like everything I've lost. Theron. He kissed her, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. His lips were cold, but they warmed against hers, and there was a desperation to the kiss that spoke of centuries of loneliness finally breaking open. She kissed him back, tangling her fingers in that pale hair, pressing close despite the danger. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. This is a terrible idea, Theron said, resting his forehead against hers. You're human. You're my employee. You'll age and die while I remain unchanged. Those are all problems for tomorrow, Vivian said. Right now we have an unconscious hunter on your floor, and a connection between us that I really don't want to ignore. He laughed, that rusty, wonderful sound. Practical even now. Very well. Help me secure Mr. Hunt, and then we'll discuss this. Development? They bound the hunter with zip ties, and called vampire security. Apparently that was a thing to take him away. Not to kill him, Theron explained, but to remove his memories and relocate him far from vampire territories. A mercy, though Hunt wouldn't see it that way. Once the mess was cleaned up and Theron's arm had healed, vampire regeneration was impressively fast. They retreated to his office. The city was starting to lighten with pre-dawn, and Theron moved away from the windows, drawing the blackout curtains. I should let you go home, he said, but he didn't move from where he stood near his desk. Should, Vivian agreed, but neither of us wants that. No. He reached out, drawing her close. She went willingly, marveling at the feel of him. He was solid and cold and utterly still in that way that marked him as other, but his hands on her waist were gentle. Vivian, I need you to understand what this means. The bond we've created, it's permanent. You'll be able to sense me, to feel my emotions, and I'll be able to find you anywhere, know if you're in danger. It's a level of connection that most humans find overwhelming. And most vampires? She asked, looking up at him. Most vampires only bond with other vampires or with humans they intend to turn eventually. His thumb brushed across her cheek. I have no intention of turning you without your explicit consent, which means I'm condemning myself to watching you grow old. Or you're giving yourself a chance to live instead of just existing. She placed her hand over his chest where no heartbeat pulsed. When was the last time you felt anything, Theron? Really felt it? Before you spilled coffee on me? I can't remember. His smile was soft, nothing like his usual cold expression. You've disrupted my existence, Ms. Brooks. Good. It needed disrupting. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Vivian felt the bond between them pulse with warmth. She could sense his emotions now: desire, yes, but also fear and hope and a fierce protectiveness that took her breath away. This was what he'd meant by connection. She was inside his head, and he was inside hers, and there was nowhere to hide. Stay here today, he said against her lips. Sleep in my quarters. I want you close while I rest. Your quarters? She'd never been to his private rooms, though she knew they existed somewhere in the penthouse. He led her through a concealed door behind a bookshelf. Of course, there was a concealed door into a space that was both luxurious and oddly sparse. The bedroom was dominated by a massive four-poster bed with heavy curtains, and there were no windows at all. Everything was decorated in deep burgundies and blacks, giving the space a timeless quality. It's very vampire, Vivian said, and he chuckled. What did you expect? A coffin? Maybe a little. I prefer comfort to tradition. He hesitated. The sun will rise soon. I'll need to rest. You're welcome to the bed, or there's a guest room through that door. Vivian looked at the bed, then at him. They'd crossed so many lines already tonight. What was one more? I'll stay here, if that's okay. The relief in his expression was answer enough. They lay down together, still fully clothed, and Theron pulled her against his chest. She could feel the absolute stillness of his body, the way he didn't breathe, but his arms around her were strong and secure. Thank you, he said softly, for not running, for seeing past what I am to who I am. Thank you for protecting me, even when I was being an idiot and not going home like you told me to. Yes, about that. We're going to have a serious discussion about you following orders when your safety is at stake. Looking forward to it, she said, smiling against his chest. As the sun rose over the city, Vivian felt Theron's body go completely still, his breathing ceasing entirely. She should have found it creepy, sleeping next to something that was technically dead during daylight hours. Instead, she just held him closer and let herself drift off, feeling safer than she had in years. The days that followed were a strange new normal. Vivian continued her duties as Theron's assistant, managing his schedule and handling correspondence, but now there was an undercurrent of intimacy to everything they did. A brush of hands when passing files, his fingers lingering on her shoulder when he read over her work, the way his eyes followed her around the office with barely concealed hunger. The other vampires noticed, of course. Celine's knowing looks became even more pronounced, and when Vivian encountered other members of Theron's circle, they treated her with a deference that was both flattering and unsettling. She was the Vampire King's bonded, which apparently came with a status she didn't fully understand. They're afraid of offending you, Theron explained one evening when she'd mentioned the change in behavior. You're under my protection, and harming you would mean facing my wrath. But more than that, you're bonded to me. That makes you precious in a way that few humans ever achieve. Precious, Vivian repeated. That's an interesting word choice. What would you prefer? Valued, treasured, beloved? He tilted her chin up, his pale eyes searching hers. Because you're all of those things, Vivian. In 6 weeks, you've become essential to me in ways I didn't think possible anymore. It's only been 6 weeks, she said, but her heart was racing. I'm 237 years old. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to recognize something real when you find it. He kissed her softly. I love you. I know it's too soon by human standards, but I've had centuries to understand my own heart, and I know what this is. Vivian's breath caught. She'd been falling for him since that first disastrous coffee incident, but hearing him say it made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. I love you too, she whispered. "Even though you're impossibly demanding and you drink blood and you're technically dead during the day. Those are all excellent reasons not to love me. And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed, and kissed him to seal it. But their happiness was short-lived. 2 weeks later, Vivian arrived at work to find the office in chaos. Vampires she'd never seen before filled the reception area, all of them pale and regal and radiating power. Celine grabbed her arm before she could enter. "The council is here," she hissed. "They've come about you." "About me? Why?" "Because Theron bonded with a human without permission. It's against protocol for someone of his rank." Vivian's blood ran cold. "What's the punishment?" "For him, probably a censure and a fine." "For you?" Celine's expression was grim. "They'll want to either turn you or kill you. You're a security risk now, bonded to one of the most powerful vampires in existence. They can't allow you to remain human and potentially vulnerable." "That's insane. That's vampire law." Celine squeezed her arm. "Be careful in there, and whatever you do, don't antagonize them. These are ancient vampires, Vivian. They make Theron look young." Vivian straightened her shoulders and walked into Theron's office. 5 vampires stood in a semicircle, all of them radiating that same otherworldly beauty and menace. Theron stood before them, his expression cold and remote in a way she hadn't seen since her first interview. "Ah, the human," one of them said, a woman with hair so pale it was almost translucent and eyes like chips of amber. "Come here, girl. Let us see what has so captivated our king." Vivian moved to stand beside Theron, and his hand immediately found hers, squeezing once in warning or comfort or both. "Council members," he said, his voice formal, "I present Vivian Brooks, my bonded and my assistant." "Bonded without permission," another vampire said, this one male with features so sharp they could cut glass. "You know the law, Theron. Those of royal blood must seek council approval before forming permanent bonds." "I'm aware of the law, Councillor Darius. I chose to break it." "Then you must face the consequences." The amber-eyed woman Vivian thought her name might be Anastasia circled them slowly. "The question is what to do with the human. She knows too much. She's bonded to you and she's vulnerable. Logic dictates we either turn her or eliminate her." "You'll do neither," Theron said, his voice dropping into that bone-deep register that marked him as dangerous. "Vivian is mine. Harm her, and council or no council, I will burn this city to the ground." The threat hung in the air. The council members exchanged glances, and Vivian realized she was watching a political calculation play out. Theron was powerful enough that going to war with him would be costly, but letting him flout their laws would undermine their authority. "Perhaps," Vivian said, her voice shaking only slightly, "there's a third option." All eyes turned to her. Theron's grip on her hand tightened in warning, but she pressed on. "I understand I'm a security risk. I know secrets that could endanger the vampire world. But I have no intention of sharing those secrets, and killing me or forcing me to turn would create its own problems. Theron would never forgive you, and from what I understand, you need him more than he needs you." Darius's smile was sharp. Bold words for a human facing death. "I'm not facing death. I'm facing politics." Vivian looked at each council member in turn. "You're not here because you actually care about protocol. You're here because you're testing Theron, seeing if his bond to me makes him weak. So let me be clear. It doesn't. If anything, it makes him more dangerous, because now he has something to protect beyond just himself." Anastasia laughed, the sound like wind chimes made of ice. "She has spirit, I'll give her that. Very well, Theron Zarkova. We'll allow your human to live, unchained and unchanged. But she must be bound by more than just your bond. We require an oath." "What kind of oath?" Theron asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "A blood oath, sealed by magic. She will swear never to reveal our existence or betray our secrets, on pain of death. If she breaks the oath, her life is forfeit, and not even you can prevent it." It was a trap, Vivian realized. They were betting that she would refuse, that she'd be too afraid to bind herself magically to her silence, or that she'd eventually slip up and break the oath, giving them legal grounds to kill her despite Theron's protection. "I accept," Vivian said before Theron could object. "Vivian, no. I accept," she repeated firmly. "If a blood oath is what it takes to prove I'm trustworthy, then that's what I'll do. I'm not going to let them force you to choose between me and your position." The council members smiled, and Vivian knew she'd just walked into something she didn't fully understand. But Theron's expression had shifted from anger to something like awe, and she knew she'd made the right choice. The oath ceremony was conducted immediately, in a room deep within the building that Vivian had never seen before. It was carved from stone and lit by candles, feeling more like a medieval dungeon than part of a modern skyscraper. The council formed a circle around her, and Anastasia produced a silver knife that made Theron hiss in discomfort. "Your blood and hers, mingled and sealed," Anastasia explained. "Speak the words, human, and bind yourself to silence." Vivian held out her hand, trying not to flinch as the silver blade cut across her palm. Blood welled up, dark and warm. Theron stepped forward, offering his own hand, and Anastasia cut him as well. They clasped hands, their blood mingling, and Vivian felt the bond between them pulse with power. "I, Vivian Brooks, do swear upon my blood and my life that I will never reveal the existence of vampires to those who don't already know. I will keep the secrets entrusted to me, and I will honor the laws of the vampire world. Should I break this oath, my life is forfeit, and I accept the consequences." The words seemed to hang in the air, glowing with an otherworldly light. Then, Vivian felt something snap into place inside her, like a lock closing. The blood oath had taken hold. Anastasia nodded, satisfied. "It is done. The human is bound. We will be watching, Theron Zarkova, but for now, you may keep your pet." "She's not a pet," Theron said coldly. "She's my equal and my partner. Remember that." The council departed, leaving Vivian and Theron alone in the stone room. He immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "That was foolish and brave and incredibly dangerous," he said against her hair. "You have no idea what you've bound yourself to." "Then explain it to me." "The blood oath is unbreakable. If you even accidentally reveal vampire existence, the magic will kill you. And I won't be able to stop it." His voice cracked. "Vivian, you've put your life in the hands of a spell you don't fully understand. I understand enough. I understand that the alternative was losing you or losing my humanity, and I wasn't willing to accept either." She pulled back to look at him. "We'll be careful. I'm good at keeping secrets, remember? That's how I ended up working for you in the first place." He kissed her desperately, and she tasted blood on his lips, her blood from the oath. The bond between them surged with emotion, love and fear, and fierce protectiveness all tangled together. "Promise me something," he said when they finally broke apart. "Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't take unnecessary risks. Only if you promise the same thing, no more facing hunters alone." "Deal." He rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how I survived 2 centuries without you. Miserably, from what I can tell." He laughed, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. They returned to his office hand in hand, and Vivian tried to pretend that everything was normal, that she hadn't just magically bound herself to secrecy on pain of death. Life continued, as it always did. Vivian managed Theron's business empire by night and slept in his arms by day, growing accustomed to the rhythm of vampire life. She learned to navigate the complex politics of their world, discovering that there were far more vampires in the city than she'd realized, all of them organized into houses and bloodlines with their own allegiances and rivalries. Theron's house was one of the oldest and most respected, which meant Vivian was treated with a courtesy that still felt surreal. She attended vampire social events at Theron's side, wearing elegant gowns he insisted on buying her, making conversation with beings who'd been alive when Shakespeare was still writing. "You're adapting remarkably well," Selene observed one evening, watching Vivian charm an ancient vampire lord with a story about modern corporate acquisitions. "Most humans would be overwhelmed." "I grew up poor and angry," Vivian said. "You learn to adapt or you don't survive. This is just a different kind of survival." "That's very pragmatic. That's very human." But there were challenges beyond just the social ones. Vivian was still mortal, still aging, even if slowly. And there was the constant underlying question of what would happen when she got older, and Theron remained frozen in time. They finally addressed it one night, 6 months into their relationship. Vivian had found a gray hair that morning, just one, but it had sent her into a spiral of anxiety. She was sitting in Theron's quarters, staring at nothing, when he emerged from his daily death sleep. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, the bond between them singing with her distress. "I'm aging," she said simply, "and you're not. And eventually, that's going to be a problem." He sat beside her on the bed, pulling her against his side. I've been thinking about that as well. And? And there are options. I could turn you if that's what you want. Make you vampire, immortal like me. We'd have forever together. But? She could hear the hesitation in his voice. But becoming vampire isn't something that can be undone. You'd have to give up sunlight, regular food, your human life entirely. And the transformation is painful, both physically and emotionally. Many new vampires struggle with the loss of their humanity. Vivian considered this carefully. She loved Theron, loved the life they'd built together. But did she love it enough to give up everything that made her human? What if I don't want to turn? She asked quietly. Then we have the time we have, and I'll treasure every moment of it. When you're old, I'll care for you. When you die, I'll mourn you for the rest of eternity. And maybe eventually I'll find a way to follow you into death, though I don't know if that's possible for vampires. Tears streamed down her face. That's the most romantic and depressing thing I've ever heard. I contain multitudes. He kissed her forehead. Vivian, I won't pressure you either way. If you want immortality, I'll give it to you gladly. If you want to remain human, I'll love you for however long we have. The choice is yours. I don't know what I want, she admitted. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. We have years before it becomes urgent. But the universe had other plans. 3 days later, everything went wrong. Vivian was working late, organizing files for an upcoming merger when she felt it through the bond. Pain, sharp and sudden, followed by rage. Theron was in trouble. She ran toward his office, her heart pounding, and found the door blown open. Inside, Theron was fighting 3 vampires she didn't recognize, all of them moving with that impossible speed. One of them had a silver sword, and as she watched in horror, he drove it toward Theron's chest. No! Vivian screamed and threw herself forward without thinking. The sword meant for Theron's heart pierced her shoulder instead, and the world exploded into pain. She heard Theron roar, felt him move with a violence she'd never witnessed before. The attackers didn't stand a chance. He tore through them like paper, his fangs bared, his eyes blazing with an unholy light. When the fight was over and the attackers were dead or fleeing, he gathered Vivian into his arms. She was bleeding badly, the silver burning in her wound, and she could see panic in his eyes. Stay with me, he commanded, his voice breaking. Vivian, stay with me. Silver hurts, she gasped out. I know, love. I need to remove it, but it's going to hurt worse before it gets better. Can you be brave for me? She nodded, though she was already shaking with shock and pain. Theron laid her gently on his desk and pulled the sword free with one swift motion. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, and felt him press his hand over the wound. You're going to be all right, he said, but she could feel his fear through the bond. Celine, get the healer, now. But Vivian could feel her heartbeat slowing, her vision dimming at the edges. There was too much blood, and the silver had poisoned her. She tried to speak, to tell Theron she loved him one more time, but the words wouldn't come. No, Theron said, his voice fierce. You're not dying. I won't allow it. Vivian, you need to listen to me. I can save you, but only if you let me turn you. If you don't want that, if you want to remain human, then you need to tell me right now, because I won't violate your choice, even to save your life. Turn her. Make her vampire. It was the choice she'd been avoiding for months, but now there was no time to think, no time to weigh consequences. She was dying, and the only question was whether she wanted to die human or live as something else. She looked up at Theron, at his beautiful, terrified face, and thought about all the things they hadn't done yet, the conversations they hadn't had, the life they were just beginning to build. And she realized that she wasn't ready to let that go, wasn't ready to leave him alone again after he'd been lonely for so long. Do it, she whispered. Turn me. Relief flooded his expression, followed immediately by grim determination. He bit into his own wrist, opening a vein, and pressed it to her lips. Drink. As much as you can. My blood will heal you and change you. His blood was cold and strange, tasting of metal, and something indefinably other. But she drank because he told her to, because she trusted him, because dying seemed like the worse alternative. As she swallowed, she felt something shift inside her. The pain in her shoulder began to recede, replaced by a different kind of burning that spread through her entire body. That's it, Theron murmured, stroking her hair. Just a little more. You're doing so well, love. The world started to blur, colors becoming more vivid, even as her other senses seemed to sharpen. She could hear things she'd never noticed before: the hum of electricity in the walls, conversations happening floors below, the rush of blood through veins. And she could smell everything, the overwhelming scent of blood and fear and death that permeated the office. "What's happening?" she asked, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "You're changing. The transformation takes a few hours. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I'll be here the entire time. You're safe now. No one will hurt you again." The healer arrived, an ancient vampire woman with eyes like liquid silver, and examined Vivian with cool efficiency. "The change has taken hold. She'll be fully transformed by dawn. Keep her comfortable and keep her calm. The first few hours are disorienting." Disorienting was an understatement. Vivian felt like her entire body was being rewired, every cell transforming from human to something else. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breathing becoming unnecessary, her body temperature dropping. It should have been terrifying, but Theron never left her side, his hand holding hers, his voice talking her through every change. "That's your heart settling into its new rhythm. You won't need it to survive anymore, but it will still beat occasionally, just much slower. Yes, the cold is normal. Our bodies don't generate heat the way human bodies do. You'll get used to it. The hunger you're feeling is the need for blood. We'll address that soon, I promise." As dawn approached, Vivian felt the pull of the sun like she'd never experienced before. It was a physical sensation, a warning that screamed danger, that told her she needed to be underground, protected, hidden. Theron carried her to his quarters and laid her in the bed, drawing the heavy curtains closed. "Sleep now," he said gently. "When you wake at sunset, you'll be fully vampire, and we'll begin teaching you what that means." Vivian wanted to argue, to say she wasn't tired, but her body had other ideas. The death sleep of vampires claimed her, pulling her under into a darkness deeper than any she'd known. She woke to Theron's voice, calling her name, and opened her eyes to find the world transformed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more detailed than it had ever been as a human. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could hear Theron's slow heartbeat, could smell the old blood that clung to his clothes from the fight. "How do you feel?" he asked, his face hovering above hers. "Strange, different, hungry." The hunger was overwhelming, a gnawing need that made her teeth ache. "Theron, I know. Come on, let's get you fed before the hunger makes you lose control." He led her to a room she'd never seen before, deep in the underground levels of the building. Inside were several humans, all of them relaxed and comfortable, clearly volunteers. Theron explained that these were paid donors, humans who provided blood for vampires in exchange for generous compensation. "Choose one," he said, "and I'll guide you through your first feeding." Vivian felt sick at the idea, but the hunger was too strong to ignore. She approached a young man who smiled at her encouragingly, offering his wrist. With Theron's guidance, she bit down, her new fangs piercing skin easily, and tasted fresh blood for the first time. It was incredible. Warm and sweet and full of life, it filled her in a way that nothing else ever had. She drank deeply, feeling her body strengthen, her senses sharpen even further. Theron's hand on her shoulder warned her when to stop before she took too much. "Good," he said as she pulled back, licking her lips clean. "You have excellent control for a new vampire. That's rare." The donor accepted payment and left, seeming none the worse for wear, and Vivian looked down at her hands. They were paler than before, her veins visible beneath skin that had taken on a slight luminescence. She was vampire now, immortal and other, and bound to Theron in ways that went beyond just their bond. "I should be more upset about this," she said, "about losing my humanity." "Should you?" Theron pulled her close. "Or are you relieved to not have to make the choice, to have it made for you?" She considered this honestly. Maybe a little of both. I wasn't ready to die, but I wasn't sure I was ready to change either. Now I don't have to wonder anymore. No regrets? Ask me again in a few decades. She looked up at him, seeing him with new eyes. He was still beautiful, still Theron, but now she could see the power that radiated from him, the centuries of life that had shaped him. "What happens now? Now we teach you everything you need to know about being vampire, the laws, the politics, the powers you'll develop. You're no longer just my assistant, Vivian. You're my bonded, my equal, and eventually, You'll be my queen. Queen. I'm the vampire king. That makes you royalty now. His smile was wry. Congratulations. You've gone from broke and desperate to immortal royalty in less than a year. How does it feel? Completely insane, but she was smiling despite everything. But maybe that's appropriate for someone who started this whole thing by spilling coffee on you. He laughed and kissed her, and Vivian marveled at how different it felt now. His cold lips matched hers perfectly. His strength was no longer something to fear, but to match. They were equals now in ways they never could have been when she was human. The next few months were a whirlwind of education. Vivian learned to control her new speed and strength, to move through the world without accidentally breaking things or revealing what she was. She learned vampire history and law, discovering just how complex and ancient their society truly was. And she learned to navigate the political landscape as Theron's queen, a role that came with both privileges and dangers. The council watched her closely, waiting for her to fail, but Vivian refused to give them the satisfaction. She'd survived poverty, abuse, and corporate corruption as a human. Vampire politics were just a new challenge to overcome. She also discovered that being vampire came with unexpected perks. She no longer had to worry about money or safety. She could read faster than ever before, devouring books in hours, and she could finally keep up with Theron, matching him in both work and in their personal life. Their relationship deepened in ways that would have been impossible when she was human. The bond between them was stronger now, an unbreakable connection that let them sense each other's emotions and thoughts even at a distance. They were partners in every sense, building an empire together, navigating vampire society as a united front. You've adapted remarkably well, Anastasia observed one evening, encountering them at a vampire gala. The council member studied Vivian with those amber eyes. I admit, I didn't expect you to thrive in this world. You hoped I'd fail, Vivian said calmly, that Theron would regret bonding with me. Sorry to disappoint. On the contrary, you've proven yourself far more capable than most vampires born to this life. Perhaps your human experience gave you an advantage. You're not bound by centuries of tradition and prejudice. She inclined her head in a gesture that might have been respect. You have my approval, Queen. Use it well. After she left, Theron pulled Vivian into his arms. You've officially been accepted by the council. That's no small achievement. Does this mean we can finally relax? In vampire society? Never. But at least now the major threats have been neutralized. He kissed her temple. We have eternity ahead of us, Vivian. What do you want to do with it? She thought about all the things she'd never been able to do as a poor human struggling to survive. All the places she'd never seen, the experiences she'd never had. And now, with Theron at her side and forever stretched out before them, anything was possible. Everything, she said. I want to do everything. Travel the world, learn languages, build something that matters, and I want to do it all with you. That can be arranged. His smile was soft, full of love and promise. Shall we start with Paris? I have a house there that's been closed for a century. It could use some life again. Paris sounds perfect. They left for Paris the following week, leaving the business in Selene's capable hands. The house Theron owned turned out to be a mansion in the Marais district, all ancient stone and elegant architecture, with reinforced windows and enough space for an army. They spent months there, exploring the city by night, making love in centuries-old beds, learning each other in ways that only immortality allowed. I never thought I'd be happy again, Theron confessed one night, as they stood on the balcony watching the lights of the city. After so many years alone, I'd convinced myself that happiness was for humans, not vampires. Then you spilled coffee on me and changed everything. Best accident I ever had, Vivian said, leaning into his embrace. Best disaster I ever survived. He turned her to face him, his pale eyes serious. I love you, Vivian. Not just for now, but for always. You're my eternity, and I will spend every moment of forever proving that to you. You'd better, she said, pulling him down for a kiss. Because I didn't give up my humanity just for the perks. I did it for you, for us. So you're stuck with me now, Vampire King. Stuck with you, he repeated, his smile growing. I can think of worse fates. They returned to the city eventually, ready to reclaim their place in vampire society and continue building their empire. But something had changed in their absence. A new threat had emerged, a faction of vampires who believed that the old ways were better, that humans should be prey instead of partners, that vampires should rule openly instead of hiding in the shadows. The rebellion was led by a vampire named Corvus, ancient and powerful and filled with contempt for everything Theron had built. He saw Theron's relationship with Vivian, his choice to turn a human and make her his queen, as evidence that the vampire king had gone soft, had betrayed his own kind for the sake of a human. "He wants war," Theron said grimly, after receiving yet another threatening message. "He's gathering supporters, vampires who believe my policies have made us weak." "Then we'll fight," Vivian said. She'd been vampire for over a year now, and she'd learned to be ruthless when necessary. "We have allies, Theron. Vampires who believe in coexistence, who don't want to return to the days of being hunted. We're not alone in this." "No, we're not." He pulled her close. "But I won't risk you, Vivian. If it comes to open conflict, then we fight together. I'm not the fragile human you hired anymore, remember? I'm your queen, and I'm not letting you face this alone." The war, when it came, was brutal and swift. Corvus made his move during a council meeting, attempting to assassinate Theron and seize control of the vampire world. But he'd underestimated Vivian, who'd been training with some of the oldest and deadliest vampires in existence. She fought at Theron's side, her new strength and speed devastating against their enemies. Together, they were unstoppable, moving as one, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's actions perfectly. When Corvus finally fell, defeated by Theron's superior power and Vivian's strategic thinking, the rebellion crumbled. "It's over," Theron said, standing over Corvus's body. The ancient vampire was still alive, but barely, silver chains binding him. "The council will decide your fate, but I can already tell you what it will be. Death for attempting to overthrow the established order." "You've gone soft," Corvus spat, blood staining his lips. "Caring for humans, turning one into your queen. You're a disgrace to our kind." "No," Vivian said, kneeling beside the fallen vampire. "He's evolved. He's recognized that our survival depends on adaptation, not on clinging to the past. You're the dinosaur here, Corvus, and just like the dinosaurs, you're going extinct." The council executed Corvus the following night, and with his death, the last major opposition to Theron's rule dissolved. The vampire world entered a new era, one where humans and vampires could coexist peacefully, where old prejudices were being challenged and dismantled. Vivian took her place at Theron's side as queen, no longer just his assistant, but his true partner in every way. Together, they reshaped vampire society, modernizing laws, establishing better relations with the human world, and ensuring that no vampire or human would have to choose between love and survival the way they almost had. Years passed, then decades. Vivian never regretted her choice to become vampire, never mourned the humanity she'd lost. She'd gained so much more love, purpose, eternity with the man who'd been alone for far too long. One evening, as they stood in their penthouse office watching the sunset over the city, Theron pulled her close. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" he asked. "When you were still human, still my assistant, still trying to pretend you weren't completely out of your depth?" "I remember being terrified and broke and desperate," Vivian smiled at the memory. "And I remember thinking you were the coldest person I'd ever met. What do you think now?" She turned in his arms, looking up at that beautiful, ageless face. "Now I think you were just waiting for someone clumsy enough to spill coffee on you and brave enough not to run away." "Best coffee stain I ever received," he said, and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. They had forever ahead of them, forever to build, to explore, to love. No more assistants would flee from the icy vampire king because he was no longer icy. Vivian had brought warmth back into his life, and he had given her a purpose beyond mere survival. Together, they ruled the vampire world with wisdom and strength, two souls who'd found each other across the impossible divide between human and monster, mortal and immortal. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, Vivian deliberately spilled coffee just to make Theron laugh, well, that was between them and eternity. The human girl who'd stumbled into an interview she should never have survived had become the vampire queen who changed everything. And the vampire king who'd forgotten how to feel had rediscovered love in the most unexpected place in the chaos, the clumsiness, and the courage of one remarkable woman. Their empire grew over the following centuries, not just in wealth and power, but in influence and change. They established sanctuaries where humans and vampires could meet safely, created laws that protected both species from exploitation, and built a world where love between human and vampire was no longer forbidden, but celebrated. And through it all, they remained devoted to each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. On their 100th anniversary, Theron took Vivian back to his office, to the exact spot where she'd spilled coffee on him all those years ago. "This is where it began," he said softly. "Where a clumsy human girl changed the course of my existence. Where an icy vampire king learned to smile again," Vivian corrected. "Where we found each other," Theron said, pulling her close. "Against all odds, against all logic, against every rule of our worlds. We found each other, and nothing has been the same since." "Good," Vivian said, kissing him deeply. "I like our version of the world better." And as they stood there, Vampire King and Vampire Queen, partners and lovers and best friends, they knew that their story was far from over. They had eternity to write new chapters, to face new challenges, to grow and change together. But it had all started with one moment, one accident, one impossible connection. The moment a desperate human girl spilled coffee on the most dangerous vampire in the city and somehow survived to tell the tale. No assistant had lasted a week with the icy Vampire King until the clumsy girl spilled coffee on him and stole his frozen heart. And in doing so, she'd saved them both. Their love story became legend among vampires, whispered about in reverent tones. The king who'd been alone for centuries, and the human who'd been brave enough to see past his cold exterior. The bond that had defied the council survived rebellion and transformed them both. And somewhere in a modern city, in a penthouse that touched the sky, they continued their eternal dance, two souls bound together across species, across time, across every boundary that should have kept them apart. Forever wasn't just a promise for them, it was their reality, their gift, their triumph. And it had all begun with one perfectly disastrous cup of coffee and a girl who refused to be afraid. The end of their story was really just the beginning of their forever. And what a forever it would be.